Okay, here we are picking up now with the pituitary glands and pituitary hormones. Okay, thyroid stimulating hormone. So if you see thyroid stimulating hormone, you have to think, okay, what does it stimulate? It stimulates the thyroid gland. Okay, so you can see the table's divided up into the hormones, the target gland, and then the function. So what does thyroid stimulating hormone do? It tells the thyroid to make thyroxine. We're going to get to thyroxine. What does thyroxine do? It stimulates cell metabolism. So this increases your metabolism. Okay, so it increases cellular respiration. All right, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and I could probably highlight all of these, but I shouldn't. They're all important. ACTH for short. Okay, they're all going to have a short term there. And the target is the adrenal cortex. So as we move through homeostasis, we need to know that the cortex, the cortex is one section of a gland or an organ, and the medulla is another. So if we have a gland, okay, or we have any kind of an organ, the cortex is the outside, so it's the surface of the organ, and the medulla is the center, medulla middle, okay? So think middle when you think medulla. All right, so the cortex is the outside. So the adrenal cortex, the outside of the adrenal gland, stimulates the release of hormones involved in stress responses, okay, coping and fluid balance. All right, so cortisone, we're going to get to that as well, but cortisone helps you to cope with stresses, okay, cortisol shots. If you've got inflammation in your knees, for instance, some of you guys are very active athletes and you've incurred some injuries, you'll go for cortisone shots, right? What that does is it helps to reduce the swelling. So adrenocorticotropic hormone is involved in your fluid balance. It's involved in swelling, because what our body does is when it's under stress is when we've stressed a muscle, when we've had some trauma incurred to our body, we build up fluid. That's our protective mechanism. So if we make a nice cushion of water, our body thinks we can't get hurt anymore, but that gets in the way of mobility. So then we have to get rid of that. So you get cortisone shots. Growth hormone. Okay, so growth hormone, also known as GH, and somatotropin, all right, two growth hormones there, affect most cells, so be aware of that. So they're not going to have specific target cells. Most cells are going to have receptors for growth hormone because most cells have to grow. So it promotes growth, protein synthesis, I've already mentioned this. It controls metabolism, all right, and it converts glycogen to glucose and fats to fatty acids. All right, follicle stimulating hormone. What grows in the follicles are the gametes. Okay, so you've got ovaries and testes. In females, follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the ovaries to make the egg. Okay, so I'm just going to write that down for you because I know these guys can get confusing. This stimulates gamete production. So what are gametes? Sex cells. So the sperm and the egg. Okay, so this is going to stimulate the follicle. So what is the follicle? It's like bubble wrap. So if you think about protective bubble wrap, in each of those little bubbles, you would see an egg, an immature egg, and an immature sperm. Okay, and so what this hormone does is it gets into that bubble and it helps to make this mature and ready to go. All right, so stimulates the development of sperm and stimulates the development of eggs. Okay. Luteinizing hormone, another sex hormone. So LH, what is the target? It's the ovaries and the testes. So in females, it stimulates ovulation. What is ovulation? It's the release of that mature egg. And it forms the corpus luteum. I'm going to talk to you about that in a couple minutes. In males, it stimulates the production of testosterone. Okay, so luteinizing hormone stimulates the production of testosterone. So you can see this is a hormone that's made. And what is its function? To get another hormone made. All right, so that's where we talk about amplification of hormones. Prolactin. When you see prolactin, think lactose. What is prolactin involved in? It stimulates milk production. And where do we make milk? We make it in our mammary glands. Okay, so mammals have mammary glands that make milk for their young. And without the prolactin, these guys would be inactive. Okay, so if a female has trouble making milk, oftentimes it's the prolactin that's lacking. And then finally, we have endorphins. Endorphins block pain sensation. Okay, so there are pain receptors in the brain for endorphins. You've probably heard of endorphins and the runner's high. So if you go for a run, technically, when you're running, you could be in a lot of pain because you're putting a lot of pressure on your joints. Muscles are working really hard. But because running is so good for the cardiovascular system and so healthy, what we do is we produce endorphins so we don't feel the pain of running. And so we actually feel like this ease in our joints and everything. And that's as a result, sorry guys, I can't talk today, a result of endorphins. Okay, so they block pain receptors in the brain. All right, the posterior pituitary has oxytocin and ADH. Okay, so oxytocin has target cells. Those target cells are in the uterus and the mammary glands. All right. So what this does, oxytocin triggers strong contractions of the uterus during childbirth. So during labor, this hormone starts to kick in. So labor is like a mystery. We don't really know when it's going to, we know it's going to happen after 38 weeks of pregnancy, but oxytocin, the actual time when, as the female body starts to produce it, people aren't quite aware yet what causes that to happen. Obviously, it's the growth of the fetus, but it could be different in every single woman, okay? So when that starts to get produced, we know that labor is coming on, and that labor is in the form of strong contractions of the uterus to expel the baby from the body. Once that hormone is circulating in the body and the baby has been born, what oxytocin does is it triggers milk release in females, okay? So it serves another purpose. So when the baby's born, this brings the milk in as well, okay? So it plays a part with prolactin, but oxytocin definitely helps in bringing the milk in for the baby. ADH, antidiuretic. If you have a diuretic, it's going to make you lose water, okay? An antidiuretic helps you to retain water. All right, so some of your grandparents might be on diuretics because they're retaining extra water due to heart conditions, etc. Antidiuretic hormone does the exact opposite. So a diuretic makes you lose water, and antidiuretic makes you retain water. So what does it do? It helps in water reabsorption by the kidneys. So when we get on to osmoregulation later on in this unit, I will remind you about antidiuretic hormone. Okay, so it helps your body, it helps your kidneys to take in extra water so you don't lose water. So when would you do that? If you have a very salty meal, like pizza and wings, okay? Lots of salt there. The next day you're going to be hanging on to extra water because you had a lot of extra salt in your meal. And it does that when your body is dehydrated. Okay, so if you're not getting enough water, your kidneys say, okay, we need to hang on to more water. How do they know that? Because antidiuretic hormone tells them to do that. ADH is in charge of that. So again here, just an explanation of how that happens. High salt levels in the blood are detected by the hypothalamus. There's that hypothalamus working again. Ethanol and caffeine, so alcohol and caffeine, inhibit ADH. All right, so just an interesting point there. If you have caffeine, so coffee, okay, and if you have alcohol, you're basically going to lose extra water, so you're going to be peeing more. Why are you peeing more? Because those guys inhibit ADH. So you probably know from your parents, if they have a lot of coffee, they're going to have to stop on a trip and use the washroom, all right, and that's the reason. So we have an increase in urine production as a result. Nicotine and emotional stress stimulate ADH secretion and water retention, okay? So nicotine does the exact opposite. Stress does the exact opposite. You want to make sure that you're keeping your water if you're stressed. ADH is also released when an injury results in heavy blood loss. Okay, so think about this. If you've got a severe injury, a person has a lot of trauma to the body and they're losing a lot of blood, your body reacts in a very awesome way. What it does is it says, okay, we can't lose that much blood. So what it does to prevent your blood volume from being lost is you produce a lot of ADH. Why? Because then your kidneys say, okay, let's hang on to extra water, and more of that water is going to be conserved into the inner core. Okay, so that's an explanation for that. And so as a result, you're going to maintain your blood pressure better. Okay, I mean, severe injuries obviously are going to result in a lot of blood loss, but this is a mechanism to try and help you to maintain your blood pressure, all right, by reducing water loss. Where? In the kidneys. All right, ADH helps with reabsorption of water to occur in the distal convoluted tubule. We will get to that, but let's highlight it so it stands out for you when we get to osmoregulation. All right, I'm going to take on the reproductive system in this note, in this lesson, and then we'll take a break, and you guys can come back and join me for the last part of this note. So, reproductive hormones. All right, there are different cycles that occur here. With males, going to start right in the middle here. Males start to produce their hormones at puberty. The hypothalamus produces gonadotropin releasing hormone, okay? So that's referred to as GnRH. It stimulates the gonads. So GnRH stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and to secrete luteinizing hormone, okay? So GnRH is going to be responsible indirectly for stimulating the gonads. How? Because it's going to stimulate FSH, and it's going to stimulate, sorry, that should be another arrow. It's going to stimulate LH, okay? Now, what does LH do? LH stimulates testosterone. Okay, so LH is directly responsible for making testosterone. So LH travels to the testes, okay? Travels to the testes and stimulates interstitial cells. All right, interstitial cells produce testosterone, okay? These guys are made in interstitial cells, okay? So these are the cells responsible for making testosterone, okay? So this ultimately ends in the production of testosterone. How? Via LH, okay? FSH travels to the testes, and this stimulates the production of sperm. So follicle stimulating hormone. Remember I said to you, inside of that bubble wrap, you're going to have the gametes. So if you are a male, in that bubble wrap, you've got some sperm that are immature. What do I mean by immature? I mean, they've just gone through meiosis, and some of them might not have tails yet. So you've got the genetic information intact, but the sperm has to have some finishing touches. For instance, the tails have to be made, okay? So this here is like the master sex hormone for males. Testosterone receptors are found in a variety of cell types, so they're not just going to be received by one type of cell. There are many types of cells in the male body and the female body that receive testosterone, okay? So some of them are going to be involved in secondary sexual characteristics, so you're going to get receptors in skin cells on the face for body hair, okay? So growing a beard, for instance, in the larynx for the deepening of the voice, okay? Greater stature, so bone cells, tendency to accumulate muscle mass. So testosterone is associated with extra strength, we know that, and muscle building, all right? And then additionally, there are going to be nervous cells that are going to respond to this in terms of male sex drive. That's also in there, okay? Females, this happens as a result of puberty as well, all right, when they begin their menstrual cycles. So we have to take a quick look at the menstrual cycle here. All right, so you know that I've put this on the test in the past. It might have even been on the exam. That's not going to be the case for you guys. And if you have the test, obviously, when you have the quiz, obviously you're going to have this in front of you. So your job is to learn how to read this graph. All right, so watch this, okay? Here is our ovarian cycle at the top. All right, so this is the follicle basically that I've been talking to you about. So typically a female has a 28-day cycle. So days 1 to 14, the temperature is a little bit lower. And this is just showing you body temperature. It does rise up to about 37 degrees once ovulation is happening. So some people that have a hard time with fertility use an ovulation thermometer. What are they doing? They're testing, or they're checking for that rise in temperature, because when you get that rise in temperature, then the egg is going to be released. Okay, so anterior pituitary hormones. When we look at this, notice this, okay? We have I'm not color coded here, so I will color code with my purple pen. Follicle stimulating hormone is this hormone here. So this is FSH. Okay, so FSH there, produced by the anterior pituitary, is part of the whole mechanism of the menstrual cycle. So FSH comes in, okay, a little bit lower, has a peak, dips down, and then FSH actually has a little bit of a peak here, okay? If you look at luteinizing hormone, it seems to do the same thing. It's a little bit lower, and then it comes up. So luteinizing, whoops, sorry, not highlighting on the right spot. Luteinizing hormone comes up in concentration first, and then what that does is it stimulates follicle stimulating hormone. So increase luteinizing hormone, and then you increase follicle stimulating hormone. Why does that happen? It happens over here as a result of these ovarian hormones. So we have a precursor to estrogen called estradiol, all right? On day 1 or 2 of the cycle, it's rather low. So estrogen rises up, okay, and on day 14, it goes through a bit of a crash, okay? And what happens then is progesterone picks up, okay? So here's our graph for estradiol, which you can just call estrogen if you'd like to. So estrogen starts out very low at the beginning of the cycle, comes up, and just before ovulation, this is what causes ovulation to happen ultimately, estrogen drops off, okay? And when estrogen drops off, notice luteinizing hormone has a peak. So estrogen, the dropping up of estrogen causes a peak in luteinizing hormone, okay? And then that causes FSH to increase, all right? Once FSH increases, progesterone increases. So progesterone's pretty low, and then progesterone goes up. Okay, so why does all this happen? Well, estrogen's the ultimate here in terms of controlling everything. So if you've got proper estrogen levels, they're going to peak around day 13, drop off. That causes luteinizing hormone to increase, okay? And what does that do? It causes FSH to increase. What does FSH do? It causes the release of the egg from the follicle, okay? And so as soon as that egg is released, then we get progesterone increasing. What does progesterone do? Notice how this coincides with progesterone. So the inner layer of the uterus is increasing in size as progesterone goes up. Why? Because this egg could land in this uterus at any time. And what does this uterus do? It takes care of us, okay? So this is where all eggs are implanted in the uterus, and the uterus is going to be really rich in blood vessels to take care of that developing egg, especially once the egg has been fertilized, and that's going to become an embryo, all right? So that's something I want you to be aware of and be able to read this graph, okay? All right, now, thyroid glands. So if we look at the thyroid gland, I'm just going to pick up here with the thyroid gland, and then I will drop off with the thymus gland, and I'll finish up there with the last lesson. So the thyroid and the parathyroid. So we have the thyroid gland again in your neck. Okay, so here's the thyroid gland, here's the thyroid gland, and on the thyroid gland, you've got your parathyroid little blister glands. Okay? So they're located in the front of the throat in humans and shaped like a bow tie. That's what we say. Okay, it produces 2 hormones. The thyroid gland produces thyroid hormone, which is also known as thyroxine. Okay, so one and the same, and calcitonin. So it's producing both of those. Thyroxine is also known as TH. Okay, so thyroid hormone or thyroxine is known as, T4, because it contains 4 atoms. I'm having a hard time speaking today. So iodine is something that we can be short on. And so if human beings are short on iodine, then you can have some trouble with your thyroid gland. So because that was discovered, and there were different types of thyroid problems like hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism, what most countries have done is they've iodized their salt. So I'm trying to make this more quick than I would if you guys were sitting with me. So iodine is added to table salt, and if you look at your box of table salt, you're going to see that it says iodized. That's because iodine is really important to the proper functioning of the thyroid gland, and so they know that most people eat salt in their diets, and so this is like the ultimate way to get extra iodine. Why do we need extra iodine? Because human beings have moved away from the ocean or the sea. And the ocean and even the soil around the ocean has a lot of iodine in it, and seafood has a lot of iodine in it. And so if you're not a big seafood eater, if you're not living along the ocean, which most people aren't on large continents like the United States and Canada, we have huge countries in North America, we don't get enough iodine. Okay, and so that's the point here. So thyroxine is a lipid hormone. Okay, that means it's going to easily move through the phospholipid bilayer. Once inside the cell, it loses an iodine atom and is converted into T3. Okay, T3 enters the nucleus and combines with nuclear receptors, and it alters gene expression, bringing about its effects. So I want you to be aware that it actually enters the nucleus, and there are receptors in the nucleus for thyroid hormone. All right. What's thyroid hormone important for? Growth, development, maturation of a human being, and metabolism. So it increases your basal metabolic rate. Okay, so your resting rate, it increases how quickly you go through cellular respiration. All right, thyroid hormone increases the sensitivity of the body to epinephrine and norepinephrine. When we get to these hormones, this is known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. So just as a backstory here, epinephrine was the original term, okay? But a lot of people said, okay, because the adrenal gland is making it, Americans particularly said this, let's call it adrenaline. And then so now people are actually going back to the original British name of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, so epinephrine is adrenaline, called adrenaline because the adrenal gland makes it, but this term is now being favored again in 2020. People are going back to this original term. And then I just tell you here that it triggers metamorphosis and it triggers molting in mammals. I'm not going to ask you that, okay, not this semester. Calcitonin is our other thyroid hormone, all right? Calcitonin is really important. Calcitonin lowers blood calcium levels, okay? So here's the thing, guys. You have to have a certain amount of blood, or a certain amount of calcium circulating in your blood all the time in order for the nervous system, and I'll just say the nervous system at this point, in order for the nervous system to function properly and for your muscles to function properly. So if you don't have enough calcium in your blood, you're going to steal it from your bones. And calcitonin tries to prevent that from happening. So calcitonin inhibits the release of calcium ions from the bones. So I like this hormone because I think it keeps our bones very strong. All right, so this is a very good hormone to have around. But if you don't have enough calcium in your blood, your heart's not going to work properly. So obviously the antagonistic pair that I'm going to get to is going to serve its purpose. So when calcium levels in the blood are too high, what happens is that calcitonin stores them in the bones. This acts mostly in childhood. So that's an important point. In other words, at your age right now, and I know you're not thinking of yourself as children, but you are still storing a lot of calcium in your bones because of calcitonin, all right? And it can be synthesized in the lungs and intestines. We're not going to worry too much about that. The parathyroid gland showed you where it is, okay? So those pea-sized little glands, okay, on the thyroid gland, it is responsible for the opposite. So it's secreted in the response to a fall in calcium levels in the blood. All right, so if you don't have enough calcium in your blood, that's when we're going to secrete PTH, parathyroid hormone. All right, so it increases the absorption of calcium and phosphates in food by promoting the synthesis of calcium-binding proteins in intestines. Okay, so what does that mean? It increases the release of calcium from bones in response to PTH. All right, so low levels of PTH cause calcium concentrations in the blood to fall, which disrupts muscle and nerve function. That's what I said to you earlier. You can't not have your muscles working. Okay, double negative there. So if your muscles aren't working, you're not going to do very well. So unfortunately, you have to steal calcium from your bones. All right, because if not, you can have convulsions and cramps. So what I want to show you is this. Okay. These guys are called antagonistic pairs. So we've got feedback loops here, okay? Homeostasis is the optimum blood calcium level, all right? And so if your calcium rises above a set point, then your thyroid gland releases calcitonin. Calcitonin is going to increase calcium levels in the bone. So we're going to take Ca2 into bones. Okay, we're going to store it. because you don't need too much calcium in your blood, okay? You need a certain amount, and there's a homeostatic concentration that needs to be maintained. So if blood calcium levels fall, okay, then we get to the point where the parathyroid gland has to be activated. And what the parathyroid gland does is it activates PTH, and this takes calcium from the bone. All right, and that balances your calcium levels. So it takes it takes calcium levels from the bone, and that maintains your homeostatic blood calcium level. So not enough calcium, okay? PTH is activated, it robs your bones of calcium. Lots of calcium, calcium is stored in your bones. So what's the message here? Try and get a lot of calcium, okay? Because after a certain age, and they usually say it's about 50, after 50, you stop storing as much calcium in your bones to maintain your blood calcium levels. So at that point, we don't have as much calcitonin working for us, and so we start to rob our bones, and that's why a lot of grandparents go for bone density tests, because we know that calcitonin is not being produced in abundance, and we're starting to take our calcium from our bones to maintain our blood levels. So I think it's up to the age of 50, I do believe that's true, that you can really jam-pack those bones with calcium. So really try and get some calcium. Obviously the downside of taking extra calcium is making kidney stones, but there's a good balance that hopefully you can achieve there, okay? So I'm on 12K. I'm just taking a glance here of what else I have to do with you. I think this is a good place to stop, okay? So I will stop here and pick up for the last section of the note.